Again, welcome back to and Another Thing. Your host, Vince Petrone. The producer, Bertram Beans, is with us today. He is here on the couch. He joined us for the show today. He is with us. He's in attendance, so he will be keeping us in order. Welcome back again, those of you watching us on YouTube. Feel free to check us out on Spotify. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out there. We have a really great show for you today. We're going to talk about President Donald Trump, his Mother's Day tweet storm that signaled what is likely to be one of, if not the underlying strategies for his presidential campaign or his reelection campaign. We'll discuss if we think that that is going to be an effective strategy, one that will work for more than just what it appears to be intended for, but we'll get to that later on in the podcast. First, we have some headlines for you today, so let's just dive on into those. Yesterday afternoon, the president took to the Rose Garden to have his first public press conference and briefing in roughly 2 weeks, with a heavy focus on testing, a battle that he declared won yesterday, announcing that the United States had met the moment and we have prevailed. A direct quote from the president. By testing more people for the coronavirus than any other country to date. However, a good portion of the president's facts and figures used to show how much testing the USA has done, not a small amount, nothing to shake a stick at. We're not here to say that we haven't done enough testing. We haven't done enough testing, but we've also done 9 million tests. One of the numbers the president threw around a lot yesterday. But what gets lost in that 9 million is that is only 3% of the United States population. Do not forget that we have a huge population, as people who argue our statistics are saying that our numbers aren't as high compared to other countries per capita because of how many people we have. Doesn't that mean we would just need more testing? We'll digress from that. Trump touted some very good numbers, that including that 9 million number we just talked about. And after checking that, it turns out to be only close to 3%, actually a little below 3%. There was quite a question and answer segment at the end of all this that we'll talk about a little bit later on here. However, the president and his administration have attempted to downplay the need for testing, despite them declaring their victory on it just yesterday, especially in the context of America's reopening. A reopening the president has been vocal about speeding along, not so vocal about no matter what steps are skipped along the way, finding whatever excuse they can to find as little as possible to do while still getting to reopen the economy prematurely and get 2 weeks of good headlines before the cases begin to explode afterward. Remember, that is what this is all about. If the president can get people to go outside for 2 weeks, have the huge bump in the economy that he keeps saying we're going to have as soon as we reopen, a bump that there is really no, well, I agree, there probably will be a bump. There's probably a pent-up need to get out there for a lot of people that could lead to a good bump in the economy pretty immediately. I do not doubt that we would have a big surge of people going out, going to businesses and trying things out. However, that's in an ideal situation where states are actually on the same page and where government and CDC guidelines aren't being skipped over like some states are doing, not meeting testing benchmarks, not meeting hospital capacity benchmarks, different benchmarks that states are setting to say you can open or you cannot open. Regardless, there is no arguing that the president and this administration have downplayed the importance of testing. That way they don't have to go about procuring more testing, go about doing the steps that they had to take to get more ventilators and expand hospital capacity, do all of that work, but in terms of testing. And then look at the amount of spending that it would probably take to get these kind of more immediate tests into, every workplace should have these kind of rapid tests. And we'll talk about that here in a second. It's interesting to hear them downplay this testing, even though the White House and the president himself, you could argue, has been the largest benefactor for continual, accurate testing on a daily basis. As most of you know by now, sorry about that, as most of you know by now, there were 2 confirmed cases last week that we know of in the White House, Katie Miller and Trump's personal valet. Who is Katie Miller? You might be wondering. She is Mike Pence's press secretary, meaning that she is literally with Mike Pence all of the time, which is really bad news for everyone at the Mayo Clinic last week, where you guys know Pence and his team visited and went maskless for, as far as we know, all of it, and actually instructed people to take off their masks so they wouldn't look like they were part of the mask brigade or whatever, but we'll digress and we'll step away from that for a moment. As well as bad news for the 3M plant that Trump went to that makes the N95 masks. And if Trump works closely with Pence, and you remember Trump went to this 3M plant, they played Live and Let Die over the loudspeakers. Very funny. But then Trump went ahead and got up in a whole bin of made ready to strap up masks to send out, and he started touching and rubbing his hands all over a few of them, tainting the whole batch. So now you have to wonder, did those N95 masks that were touched by a president who came within direct contact with someone who came within direct contact that has been diagnosed with the coronavirus, can those N95 masks be used now? Is that a whole...
He touched them directly?
Yeah, you see in the video whenever he reaches down, and he's the guy puts a mask in, he grabs it, and he's you can tell he's trying to have an intelligent conversation about the masks, he knows what they're made out of or something. He goes, so this is, and he's touching it, and he's showing the guy the mask he just made.
Oh no, they probably threw that away as soon as he left.
You'd have to, right? talk about a huge waste of resources. But anyway, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. What else we got here? Not to mention Trump's personal valet who has had it. Another direct contact with the president who, again, was putting his grimy hands all over those freshly made masks for, we assume, frontline workers and all of this. Not to mention that Katie Miller is the wife of one of Trump's closest staffers, the famed Stephen Miller, everybody's favorite, Southern California. Is he from, where's Stephen Miller from? Regardless, he's a fascist. He's not great. He's the architect of every policy the president put forward that got slapped with racism, xenophobia, any kind of anything to do with immigration, anything to do with immigrants, anything to do with the border. All of that came from the brilliant mind and the very smooth forehead of Stephen Miller. So it's his wife. Again, he's very close, not to his wife. So Stephen Miller's wife, who is already close to Mike Pence, who is already close to President Trump. But then you add in that this person who literally has contact with Trump every day. Not that Mike Pence doesn't have contact every day with Donald Trump, but Stephen Miller also in direct contact with his wife, who has the coronavirus. So what you have essentially is a small cesspool forming at the White House of coronavirus. And the crazy thing is, they put out a statement today. This isn't crazy, I guess, but they put out a statement today saying that people in the White House working are going to have to wear protective face masks now. It is going to be, I believe they said mandatory, but you know who pledged today that he still will not wear a mask? Donald Trump. Despite it being required by his workplace. And he can do that. And it's important to remember that he can get away with doing this, not only because he's Donald Trump and he gets away with everything he wants to do because of who he is and the stature he had and the person he was before he was the president. And then you add in being the president in the Republican Party that has no accountability for his actions. He can do whatever he wants and will continue to do whatever he wants as long as he continues to test negative for the virus and continue to test negative for the virus every day. Don't forget, Trump is the beneficiary, again, of daily testing, something he continues to leave out of his literally... He leaves this out every time he talks about the testing. Acts like we don't need the test, like the tests aren't going to help everybody. But then he gets a test every day. And then you have people that support the president, believe what the president says, trust that what the president says is the right thing to do. And then they go out of their homes and they don't wear masks. And they go to stores and they go grocery shopping and they go out and about and they go to the coffee shop and they go wherever people are going that aren't practicing social distancing or wherever people are going to get out of the house. They go to these places and they don't wear masks. And they do that because the president doesn't do that. But what these people forget is that the president has the benefit of literally getting tested every single day. So if the president somehow is walking around maskless and let's say he's on a flight to Camp David. Let's say they test his pilot. Let's say the pilot of, is it Air Force One? Does Air Force One go to Camp David? What's the chopper called? They have a helicopter too. I think they take the helicopter to Camp David because I know that's what Bush always took. You'd always see Bush getting in the helicopter, not so much the airplane. Marine One. Okay, so the pilot of Marine One tests for the coronavirus. Trump is there for the weekend. He tests positive for coronavirus after only having the virus for one day, having it in his system. He can test immediately. He shows no symptoms. The president can now get himself treated sooner than the average Joe could get himself treated, because not only is he the president of the United States, but he caught it immediately on the first day. So now an asymptomatic president of the United States can get treated for coronavirus and likely survive. But what is important to remember to the dads that need to go out and need to go to, I don't know, go to Colup's True Value, or go to the Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever people are going and gathering in mass, or going to Subways or going to Applebee's or whatever, wherever people are congregating, going to these rallies, and they're not wearing masks. Remember, you can't get a test until you show symptoms. By the time you show symptoms, you might be a few days into this already. By the time you get your test results after showing symptoms, it might be too late, my man. So, just because the president's not wearing a mask, do not forget that the president has a ton of privilege, and him not wearing a mask, one, is not to protect him. The mask does not protect you. It protects people around you. But he can flout some of these social distancing policies and have limited repercussions, whereas you, the average person, cannot. So bear that in mind, and do not forget that there is also good contact tracing available to the president, something that they, and to all these people working in the White House. So when they say you don't need testing, and whenever we keep hearing them say we don't need testing, I hope the media keeps doing what they did yesterday and hold the president accountable and ask him why we don't have more testing, and ask directly why, if it's not important for everybody else, it's so important for you in the White House to have. Ask plain and simple that. When asked about his comments after by CBS reporter, whenever they started asking the question and answer segment of the president's briefing, it got pretty unruly. When asked after his comments by CBS reporter, I hope I don't screw the name up here too bad, Weijia Yang. I know I didn't do well in the first name. I'm sorry. He was why his view on testing is as a global competition when, in her words, everyday Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day. The president responded by saying that people are dying all over the world, and that Chiang, who it is worth noting here is a Chinese American, should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China. A direct quote from the president of the United States in the middle of a global pandemic. Don't ask me, ask China. When he tried to move on, CNN reporter, I think Caitlin Collins, allowed Jiang, who was upset visibly. We didn't watch it yesterday. We watched the highlights. That's how we get all of our coronavirus update news, is from the highlights, because we can't put ourselves through that, and we won't put ourselves through that here at Own Another Thing. Collins gave up her question for a moment to let Jiang follow up with her second question, which was, why would you say that to me? The president then ignored it. You can go back and see the clips on Twitter. It's all over the place. But in the end, you see the president storm off, have a temper tantrum, and just walk out of the briefing that he scheduled. Left a question and answer segment without having more than a few questions launched at him, all of which he did not take well. And really just a poor showing by the president, per usual, in his briefing. So carry that over into this morning. The president's temper tantrum carries on. He goes on one of his famous Twitter dumps, likely to distract us from the fact that Dr. Fauci went in front of the Senate today to say that a premature reopening will cause a lot more death and suffering, which takes us to the other news for the day, which came from the weekend, with Donald Trump screaming the campaign strategy, or at least the early phase of it, out loud on his Twitter for everybody really to see. We'll call it his weekend rally, essentially. And you can go to Medium. We wrote about this on our Medium page. Those of you checking us out on YouTube, you can now get and Another Thing as a publication on Medium. We'll try to post at least one story a day. If we can get 2 up there, we'll get 2 up there for you guys. Give it a follow. Check it out. We wrote about this subject on there yesterday, so if you want more details, you can go look over there and see it in the written form if you want. But Trump yesterday, and we'll talk more about the press conference here actually, was asked about his Twitter storm and what he meant whenever he tweeted Obamagate this weekend is, I'm sure you now know because it turned into a bigger story than it should be. The president went on a 120-some tweet tirade on Twitter over the weekend on Mother's Day instead of doing something better with his wife and his kid. His wife. Instead, he was tweeting. And at some point, after dumping a shit ton of Greg Jarrett articles on us and a shit ton of Daily Wire shit on us to back up his claims that he was about to make, which is that Obamagate was a real thing. Tweeted Obamagate in all caps. But what is Obamagate? It was asked to him yesterday in the press conference, and all he said was, you know what the crime is. The crime is obvious to everybody. So the crime, of course, that the president believes or wants his base to believe, I don't know if he actually believes it, he probably does because he's a lunatic, is that in the waning days of the Obama administration, Barack Obama ran a puppet investigation of Donald Trump and helped to spur the FBI along in investigating the president's ties to Russia. Obviously, this will be their strategy to some extent or another to drag the Obama admin down and to in turn take down the Biden campaign, as they are one and the same. In the same fashion he did with Hillary Clinton. They are looking for their butthurt emails of this campaign, and that will be a big play by the campaign. This was the Death Star moment that Brad Parscale, was hyping last week with his tweet with the Death Star in it. This accompanied with a cascade of articles that are again shoddily researched and based in conspiracies derived from small infractions at the FBI and goofy little such and such did such and such with such and such knowledge and said this to whomever kind of thinking and kind of narratives. It's classic conspiracy theory framing. And the dangerous thing about it is that this story already has and will likely get more legs. The annoying and shitty thing is that this will get legs and lightly legitimized by a media that, again, puts fairness at times in front of fact-based journalism. That is to say that something like this, or like birtherism, some fringe story that when enough right-wing voices, they come together and they say the same thing enough, it becomes a story that the media has to cover. It becomes some kind of a legitimate story that if you refuse to cover it, you're going to be called unbiased because you only talk about what the Democrats want to talk about. You only talk about the crimes committed by Republicans. So why don't you talk about the crimes committed by Democrats because they commit crimes too? And you get caught up in that whole circle of fairness and making sure both sides are happy. And the media does this, and they do it all the time, and it led us to where we are. Do not forget, the email story turned out to be a big nothing burger. It's been called that multiple times. It's been debunked multiple times by different committees, different investigative bodies within the House and the Senate, that anything on those servers was likely not pertinent to what happened in Benghazi. And it was all overblown, shouldn't have been the story it was, and because it was, it likely cost Hillary Clinton the election. You could argue. So the dangerous thing is that this will get legs in the same way that Benghazi got legs, in the same way that birtherism got legs, and you'll end up having sham trials. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, because do not forget, Bill Barr is in charge of the DOJ. Do not forget that Bill Barr already appointed, John Durham. Yes, John Durham, to investigate the Russia investigation, to do a private inquiry into the handlings of Russia and the handlings of the investigation, the handlings of the Mueller investigation, the Mueller report. So there's already a chance that at some point in the next month, 2 months, we get another story, a big news dump, some kind of, oh, look at what we found here. Look at this connection John Durham dug up from such and such person at the lowest level of Obama's administration having a small conversation with this person who worked for the FBI, and they'll connect it, and then you have your scandal. And you have your email story. And it's obviously a play to rile up his base, and that is all it is. Which is likely all this campaign will be. That is important to remember, that there is not much Trump can do to swing middle ground voters. So this is all middle of the road voters, excuse me. I know it's the same thing, but middle of the road is the better term. It's likely going to be all this campaign is, not to mention that it'll be a tough campaign to pull off, only for how craven of an effort it will have to be. Though there is one thing that we have seen this administration actually does well and actually does competently, and that is really craven, pointless things that satisfy their base and only their base. If there's one thing this administration is good at, it is doing that. That being said, and we have said before that we think campaigning hard at your base, though effective in getting the turnout up, and granted, if your turnout is 30%, it's a good turnout to have if you can get all of it. That group is already pretty reliable, and we know that Trump's base particularly doesn't take much to inspire. Clearly, all you have to do is close an Applebee's and they'll take a gun to a courthouse for you, so it doesn't take much to make these people upset, to inspire these people to go to the voter booths. So I think that this strategy is flawed on a lot of levels because it does nothing to, one, appeal to swing voters or anyone at all other than Trump's extreme base, and that is easy to fall for conspiracies as base. Imagine being a Republican, a non-Trump Republican, a Republican who would have voted for John McCain, or who did vote for John McCain. Let's go back that far and say that those kind of Republicans still exist, and there's a Republican Party of even as far back as the Reagan era that had at least a backbone to do really shitty things, but to do those shitty things in a more acceptable way. I don't know how to explain the good Republican voter, but let's say the good Republican voter out there. The people who, like people at the Lincoln Project that are making all these really good anti-Trump ads. Like that. Imagine being one of those kind of Republicans trying to justify voting for Donald Trump to have a second term and having to go through a process of thinking about the growing economic turmoil that he caused, rising death tolls, and scrutiny over how Trump himself has spoken about this pandemic, and then counter that with his actions on the pandemic. Then if you add on top of that pile that Trump will be using his time to push these bogus theories and conspiracies about crimes that never actually happened. What is important to remember here is that, again, on a weekend where the United States passed or came close to passing, I think we passed 80,000 deaths today, but when the United States was on a rocket track to hit 80,000 coronavirus-related deaths in this country, Donald Trump spent his Mother's Day morning in the middle of this pandemic, tweeting about Barack Obama, tweeting about Michael Flynn, tweeting about the Russia hoax, as he calls it, all of it. Issues that don't even really move the needle for voters. We'll talk about that here in a second, but that is how he spent his time in the middle of a pandemic. Swing voters will see that. Trump's base won't give a shit about that, and we know Trump's base won't give a shit about that because they don't give a shit about anything he does. He could do anything he wants, and they won't care. That's his 30%, and that's why it's not worth arguing for that 30%, and that's why it's not worth worrying about what that 30% likes or what that 30% wants to hear, because we know that they're going to hear it somehow anyway, and it's not likely to be 100% factual, 100% worth anyone else's time, but this small cluster of people in Trump's base that he needs to satisfy, and that for some reason now the media feels they need to satisfy. He'll be doing all of this negative campaigning, all of this drudging up old stories, all of this conspiracy hunting, all of this, what can I get Giuliani to say about John Durham's investigation, all of this kind of backroom, unproven conspiracy stuff that made people stray from him during the Ukraine investigation. Do not forget. The Ukraine investigation and his impeachment, Donald Trump's impeachment, did lose some Republican support. Some people did leave. Some people used that as an excuse to vote in Democratic primary or vote for Democratic candidates because of what they saw as the bastardization of our democracy. Doing all of this He'll be doing all of that again while trying to say that he is dealing with a pandemic and having to deny every bit of evidence to the contrary that he is dealing with that pandemic. And I hope there are lots of those Republican voters, and I know that there are at least some who may have voted for Trump in 2016 that now won't. Do not forget that Trump will be in this election having to fight against his own record, which is one that gets worse by the day. Then, to spend a portion of your campaign rehashing an investigation that, again, polling has shown doesn't move the needle with voters that much anyway, especially undecided voters. Then, trying to attack an administration and a specific past president that polling shows more people than like Trump, and by an overwhelming margin. I know that you could argue Trump won in 2016 because people didn't like Obama or Hillary Clinton or the swamp, and I think we'd be surprised to see, one, that's not wrong. That is not a wrong take, but I think we'd be surprised to see a lot of those people, or a portion of those people that were screaming for a drained swamp or saying they didn't want career politicians anymore, have seen this and have likely changed their minds a little bit. We are not counting out the president's ability to pull off a very shitty, craven campaign. All we are saying is that it is a different campaign than the one in 2016, and his campaign needs to realize that too if they want to win. Now, here on another thing, we are hoping that they do not realize that. We believe that that is a very, very bad strategy for the Trump administration if they do want to get reelected, because, again, that base is only so large. And do not forget that everything Trump does to inspire his base counteracts itself somehow by inspiring another pocket of Democratic voters somewhere else. That is why so many suburban voters have started turning out for Democratic candidates. That is why you see these demographic voter numbers change the way they have since 2016. This is a different campaign than it was in 2016. And it is increasingly evident, literally every day, that this is going to be a different story than 2016, because the president will have to fight against himself. It helped him to not be an insider last time. It helped the president that he wasn't the president, that he had no governing record. And it might help Joe Biden that he does have a governing record. We talked about this a little bit in the Medium article yesterday, which, again, go check that out, and we'll close up here. Joe Biden has a voting record that is not great to a lot of people in the new progressive left. I say the new progressive left because the new progressive left seems to be the only people that really care that much, and should probably care a little bit more about Joe. Well, the rest of the party should care more about Joe Biden's voting record, the same way that this progressive left does. But however, it will be hard for people to go and say, especially Republicans, to say, Joe Biden crafted the 1994 crime bill. The 1994 crime bill led to mass incarcerations. Now imagine trying to explain that to someone who doesn't understand, one, the problem that is mass incarceration, or two, wants to admit that it is an issue. And then three, think of who that group of people is, predominantly Trump voters. Now try using Biden's vote in the 94 crime bill against him with a Trump voter, or someone leaning to vote for Donald Trump that might not understand the pitfalls of that 94 crime bill, or once you explain that to them, even give a shit about it. There is an issue there, and that's because, again, that crime bill, though it was bad for minorities, bad for black people, it was good for the prison system. It was good for mass incarceration, the things that Trump voters don't care about or see as a fine thing, because those people went to jail, obviously, for something, they'll say. So, Trump's record is easier to attack than Biden's record, but then you add in trying to attack Biden and Obama's record at a time whenever Trump's popularity is close to the lowest it's been, on the decline. I know his approval ratings are okay. I think he's at 43% today. Regardless, whenever you pin the two against each other overwhelmingly, Barack Obama beats Donald Trump every time. And that's not to say that all Obama has to do is go make a couple of stump speeches and Donald Trump's going to turn into a Medusa statue or whatever. That's not going to happen. But there is something to be said for that being a flawed attack against the Obama administration with swing voters, or people that, even, don't forget, Don't forget what won a lot of districts and won a lot of counties for Barack Obama and Donald Trump was the same voter group. A lot of people that voted for Barack Obama ended up voting for Donald Trump in 2016. Why would you attack that? And then don't forget, seniors' lives don't matter anymore. There's a lot stacking up against the president and this campaign. And if this is what they're giving us, that's good news for us, I guess. Thank you guys for listening to and Another Thing. We will be back on Friday with who knows what. We used to say that ironically, but at this point, we really have no idea what the hell is going to happen. We'll be back Friday. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you can see us all the time in video form, see behind the scenes, get sneak peeks of Bertram, our producer, see the studio. Check us out on Spotify. Subscribe to us there. Leave us comments, ratings, whatever you can do. Share us. Do anything you can. Check us out on Medium. And Another Thing. We'll be back on Friday. Have a good week.